Scorpios tend to have a reputation for being intense, mysterious, and hard to read. But underneath that exterior is someone who values trust, authenticity, and emotional honesty more than most people realize. Because of that, there are certain behaviors that Scorpios simply cannot tolerate. Let's explore some of Scorpios' pet peeves and the behaviors that can cause them to lose respect, shut down emotionally, or quietly distance themselves. Dishonesty. If there's one thing Scorpios have very little tolerance for, it's dishonesty. Scorpio is a sign that places a tremendous amount of importance on trust, and because they tend to be highly observant and intuitive, they often sense when something feels off long before they can prove it. That's why even small lies can be more damaging than people realize. It's usually not just about the lie itself, it's what the lie represents. If someone is willing to distort the truth, Scorpio begins to question what else they may be hiding. And once doubt enters the picture, it can be difficult for them to feel emotionally safe with that person again. Scorpios understand that nobody is perfect, but they do value honesty. In many cases, they would rather hear an uncomfortable truth than be given a polished story that doesn't feel genuine. Because for Scorpio, trust is everything. And once trust is broken, the relationship is rarely the same. Fake or superficial behavior. Another major pet peeve for Scorpio is inauthenticity. Scorpios are naturally drawn to what feels real. They tend to look beneath the surface and pay close attention to a person's motives, emotional depth, and consistency. So when someone seems overly performative, image conscious, or insincere, Scorpio often picks up on it quickly. This can include people who say what others want to hear, adopt a persona to gain approval, or avoid showing who they really are. To Scorpio, that kind of behavior can feel emotionally empty. They're typically less interested in charm and more interested in substance. They want to know what's genuine beneath the surface. And they often respect people who are honest about their flaws far more than those who appear polished, because for Scorpio, authenticity creates trust. And without trust, it becomes difficult for them to form a meaningful connection. Betrayal and disloyalty. Scorpio takes loyalty very seriously. They may not trust easily, but when they do, they tend to invest deeply. That's why betrayal can be one of the most painful experiences for them, whether it's broken confidence, divided loyalties, or discovering that someone was not as committed as they appeared. Betrayal often cuts to the core. For Scorpio, loyalty is more than a nice quality to have. It's a reflection of character. They tend to remember who stood by them and who did not. And once someone proves they cannot be trusted, Scorpio may never view that person the same way again. Even if they choose to forgive, the emotional landscape often changes, because when a Scorpio opens up to someone, they are offering something deeply personal. And if that trust is mishandled, it can be very difficult for them to fully let their guard down again. Invasion of privacy. Scorpios are naturally private people. Even when they care deeply about someone, they tend to reveal themselves gradually and on their own terms. That's why one of their biggest pet peeves is having their boundaries crossed. This can include prying questions, pressure to disclose personal information, or someone sharing private details without their permission. To Scorpio, privacy is closely tied to trust. They want to feel that what they reveal will be handled with care and discretion. When someone pushes too hard or exposes something personal, it can feel like a serious violation. Scorpios generally prefer relationships where emotional intimacy develops organically. They open up when they feel safe, not when they feel cornered. manipulation, and mind games. So, Scorpios are often highly perceptive. They tend to notice subtle shifts in behavior, mixed signals, and hidden motives. Because of this, they have little patience for manipulation. This can include passive aggressive behavior, guilt trips, attempts to provoke jealousy, or emotional games designed to test their reaction. Scorpio generally respects directness. If something is wrong, they would rather someone say it plainly than try to control the situation indirectly. What bothers them most is the underlying lack of honesty. Manipulation creates uncertainty and undermines trust. And once Scorpio senses that someone is operating with a hidden agenda, they may become guarded very quickly. They value emotional depth, but they also value transparency. And relationships tend to work best with Scorpio when both people are straightforward about what they want and how they feel. Lack of emotional intelligence. Scorpios tend to be emotionally perceptive. They often pick up on what is left unsaid and notice subtle undercurrents in people and relationships. Because of this, they tend to appreciate emotional maturity. They value people who can communicate directly, understand nuance, and consider how their words and actions affect others. So, one of their biggest pet peeves is dealing with someone who lacks emotional intelligence. This can show up as poor communication, emotional impulsiveness, chronic defensiveness, or an inability to empathize. It can also appear as short sighted thinking. For example, someone may focus only on defending themselves without considering the broader impact of their behavior. To Scorpio, interactions like this can feel exhausting. They often prefer to invest their energy in people who are thoughtful, self reflective, and emotionally aware because meaningful connection requires more than strong feelings. It requires the ability to understand those feelings and communicate them maturely. Lack of self awareness and accountability. One thing Scorpios tend to have very little patience for is a lack of self awareness. They are naturally introspective. They spend a lot of time observing themselves, analyzing their motivations, and trying to understand what is happening beneath the surface. Because of that, they often expect the same level of honesty from others. What frustrates Scorpio is when someone cannot recognize their own role in a situation. Instead of admitting they were wrong, they may become defensive, shift blame, justify their actions, or portray themselves as the victim. That kind of behavior can quickly erode Scorpio's respect, not because Scorpio expects perfection, but because they value accountability. In fact, many Scorpios are surprisingly forgiving when someone can sincerely admit their mistakes. Owning up to your behavior demonstrates humility and character. Refusing to do so suggests that the same issues are likely to repeat. And once Scorpio realizes someone lacks the capacity for self reflection, they may decide the relationship is no longer worth their energy. Broken promises and inconsistency. Scorpios pay close attention to patterns. They notice whether someone's actions align with their words. And because trust is so important to them, consistency matters a great deal. When someone makes promises they don't keep, changes their behavior without explanation, or repeatedly says one thing and does another, Scorpio begins to lose confidence in that person. It may not happen all at once, but over time, inconsistency can erode respect. Scorpio tends to value reliability more than grand gestures. They're often less impressed by what someone says and more focused on whether that person follows through. To them, consistency is a sign of integrity. And when integrity is missing, it becomes difficult for Scorpio to feel secure in the relationship. Being underestimated or disrespected. Scorpios are often far more perceptive than they initially appear. They tend to observe quietly, notice subtle details, and form strong impressions beneath the surface. Because of this, they can be especially sensitive to being underestimated or dismissed. This might include someone talking down to them, assuming they are unaware, or treating their thoughts and feelings as unimportant. Scorpio tends to value respect, and once they feel genuinely disrespected, they may begin to emotionally detach. What makes this pet peeve particularly significant is that Scorpios usually do not react immediately. They may appear calm on the surface, but internally they are taking note. And if the pattern continues, they may quietly withdraw and stop investing in the relationship altogether. Neediness and feeling suffocated. Scorpios value emotional intimacy, but they also need space. They tend to open up on their own terms, and they can become uncomfortable when someone is overly clingy, intrusive, or constantly seeking reassurance. If a Scorpio likes you, they will make it known. Trying to force closeness or hovering over them often has the opposite effect. What they want is a relationship that feels emotionally secure, not emotionally overwhelming. Scorpio is a sign associated with depth and intensity, but that does not mean they want someone in their space at all times. In fact, many Scorpios need periods of solitude to process their thoughts and emotions. When someone becomes too dependent or fails to respect their need for privacy, Scorpio may begin to pull away. Because for Scorpio, true intimacy is built on trust and mutual respect, not emotional pressure. Closing. When you look at Scorpio's biggest pet peeves, they all point to one core issue: integrity. Scorpios can be intense, but beneath that intensity is a deep need for trust, honesty, and emotional maturity. They do not expect perfection. They understand that everyone makes mistakes. What matters to them is whether someone is self aware enough to own their behavior, emotionally intelligent enough to understand its impact, and genuine enough to communicate honestly. When those qualities are present, Scorpio can be one of the most loyal, protective, and devoted signs in the zodiac. But when they are absent, Scorpio may quietly begin to detach because they no longer feel emotionally safe investing in the connection.